Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5. Almost as clear as day, I can recall the thoughts that went through my head when I saw the announcement of Sonic X Shadow Generations. When there were rumors of a Generations remaster not long prior, that was already good enough for me. But seeing the addition and main attraction of a brand new campaign for Shadow filled me with a lot of intrigue, to say the least. Shadow is a character who has sadly not been treated the kindest by the writing department in the modern era, or the 2010s to now be more accurate. Going from his well-developed character of being an introverted yet selfless hedgehog who does care about others, especially those he's grown close to, and remains steadfast in his mission of fulfilling his promise to Maria, who people often mistook for being an edgelord, into an actual edgelord. Amongst all the flanderization and butchering of characters throughout the 2010s, Shadow's case I found to be one of the most egregious, because it completely spat in the face of his true character, becoming this edgy tryhard who's just a dick to everyone and can't have friends or feelings, leading to more people calling him an edgelord in his entirety as part of some vicious cycle. The sheer decimation of his character left me yearning for the real Shadow to come back for so long. So after Frontiers was such an amazing return to form for all the characters present there, the first thing that came to mind when I saw the announcement was hoping they would do the same for Shadow. Then as more and more marketing was revealed for Shadow Generations over the months, including teases for the story and seeing the return of long forgotten aspects of Shadow's character from just the Dark Beginnings prologue, it made me even more confident in that hope becoming a reality. Becoming one of the main reasons why this was probably the most hyped I've ever been for a Sonic game. Which makes me feel a little bad, seeing as it's more Shadow's game. And playing through it myself, I could make a video alone on how awesome the gameplay, level design, bosses, and music are, but of course, all that build up for Shadow's characterization would end on a sour note if they didn't follow through with it in the game itself. So did they? Yes, 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 fuck yes! They delivered on pretty much everything I hoped to see in this story, leaving me feeling more than satisfied, invested, and ecstatic with the results as I watched them unfold while playing. And honestly, this video was really just for me to gush about how much I loved the writing here, both for being a return to form for Shadow, as well as the writing for his character beyond that. So with the core theme of the story being Shadow revisiting his past, taking the Generations approach actually creates the perfect setup for that. Not just for the literal revisit of the past, with it being all about time travel where levels from previous games reappear, but mainly because it provides an excellent excuse to retread old ground and re-establish Shadow's character pre-2010s in a way that feels natural. With each of the levels taken from the chronological past possessing a great significance to his history and the events he went through in their respective games. Mostly in a sort of subtle, thematic, if you know way. It's that setup combined with those underlying themes that makes the starting premise already so great, which the story itself then builds upon as it plays out, especially for the personal journey that Shadow goes through here. As with the return of Black Doom, Shadow once again has to confront his origin of being created using Black Doom's DNA, but with a much more profound execution compared to Shadow the Hedgehog. It was always my headcanon that Shadow was repulsed by his Black Arm's DNA, so it was cool to see that actually confirmed in Dark Beginnings. And that idea is somewhat continued in the game itself through the implementation of the Doom powers. Now, Shadow has to embrace that part of himself by using these powers, wherein I got the impression that he initially uses them not necessarily because he wants to, but as a means to an end since they'll allow him to overcome the challenges thrown his way. But this is all by Black Doom's design, so the Doom powers mutations can slowly corrupt Shadow, eventually allowing him to take over Shadow's body so he can become the ultimate life form himself. As well as attempting to worm his way into Shadow's head with his words during the trippy Radical Highway sections to mess with him. Throughout much of the story, as Shadow is forced to use the Doom powers, we see moments where that corruption starts to affect his mind, making him become more aggressive and overly violent, which ironically was how he was often depicted fighting in the 2010s. Now it's nice to see the distinction that that's not how he normally acts, made further by the occasions where his conscience fights off the corruption's influence, namely when he has to fight Sonic. He was briefly tempted to use the Doom powers to beat Sonic, but didn't go through with it, which caused him to lose, because he only wants to face Sonic in a fair fight. I love how they remembered that Shadow actually respects Sonic, rather than being so antagonistic towards him for no reason. If this was Edgelord's Shadow, he would absolutely use those powers to win as a way of proving his superiority or whatever. But he doesn't, and he doesn't take any issue with losing to Sonic either. Not to mention how in Shadow Generations, the reason this fight even happens is because they both need the Chaos Emerald for their own goals, instead of Shadow just wanting to beat up Sonic like he is in Sonic Generations, where they kept that terrible line in this version for some reason. Speaking of the fights Shadow gets into, there's also a substantial improvement in his writing for the interactions with the bosses he goes up against. As a common thread between them all is that whenever Shadow talks himself up or talks smack to them, it comes off in a confident, "I'm gonna take you down" vibe. Similar to Sonic, but in a more serious tone. None of that, "you're so pathetic and weak" crap like he was to Infinite and Forces. As for specifics, with the Bio-Lizard, as soon as the fight begins, Shadow says,
"You tortured soul, I will end your suffering."
They displayed that Shadow actually feels sympathetic towards the Bio-Lizard's painful existence, and that the whole fight is him trying to put it out of its misery, which is a far cry from how he treated it in Adventure 2.
"Get out, you ugly prototype!"
Showing that he's even developed a noticeable amount from his characterization back then. Not sure why Iizuka said he doesn't feel sympathy for it, unless he was only referring to Adventure 2. We also get a theme of development as Shadow faces off against Mephiles. Like so many others, I was so stoked to see them bring back Mephiles, even for just a boss fight. He was such a perfect foil to Shadow in 06, being reflective of how he was throughout most of Adventure 2 when his memories had been altered by Gerald, to again show how much he's grown since then. Though that does have to be another subtle thematic element here, seeing as Shadow doesn't remember Mephiles due to 06's whole thing of erasing itself from the timeline.
"You took everything from me.
I don't even know who you are."
On the opposite end with allies, we do get a little bit of the Team Dark dynamic in this game too. I always liked the execution of Team Dark's concept, in part because it allowed Shadow to find friends again after losing Maria, with whom he shows glimpses of his softer side. Only for Sega to be like, they're not actually friends because Shadow can't have any friends. He has to be an edgy loner all the time now. But thankfully, it appears they've gone back on that sentiment in this game. I mean, there's dialogue with Rouge that confirms Shadow was worried about her when she was trapped by the Time Eater, which is certainly an improvement from when he just ditched her and Omega when they needed his help in the Racing Overdrive short. And before the final battle, Rouge even admits just how much she trusts Shadow and cares about his well-being. Which reminded me a lot of the moment when she said something similar to comfort Shadow in 06, which I thought was a great moment for both of them as characters. So it's nice to see them bring something like that back here. Even Omega confesses he has full belief in Shadow. So all in all, it leaves me thinking, thank you! That's what I've been missing from this team when you've been ignoring it over the years. But I've been dancing around the real key component of this story long enough. With the story revisiting Shadow's past, there was one thing above all else I hope they do. Something I desperately wanted to see. And what do you know? Those crazy sons of bitches actually did it. Having Maria appear due to all this wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. For all the character development potential and opportunity to show Shadow being more emotional with seeing her again after so long. And much like before, they did everything I hope they do with this. Even in the lead up to this game, that anticipation grew further thanks to Dark Beginnings. Cause, to be honest, I never really gave Maria much thought as a character in her own right in the past. I mostly just saw her as girl who dies and only focused on her role within Shadow's character arc. But Dark Beginnings showed a much more in-depth look at who she was, how kind and optimistic she was, and how she saw the best in everyone, which was seen in practice by how much of a pillar of support she was for Shadow, with how she was always there to comfort him and remind him of who he truly is when he was struggling with his own existence, being this genetic experiment struggling to accomplish the reason he was created and sharing DNA with a demonic, warmongering alien race, leaving him fearing he can't find a place where he belongs. It gave me a much greater appreciation of Maria's character, while simultaneously enhancing Shadow's, as it provides a greater understanding of why he was so close to her, and why her death affected him so deeply. Also, side tangent, it feels so much better having a version of Maria in the games who doesn't look like a Barbie doll. or an alien. And Gerald was also brought here, which I found so interesting to get a greater look at how altruistic he was before being driven mad with grief after Maria's death. Going so far as to show him taking on a proper father figure role to Shadow, displaying how he too played a part in shaping who Shadow is. Some of that emotional element I wanted is displayed right off the bat, as Shadow immediately lets his guard down and speaks more softly when he's with them, showing signs of how he was back on the Ark 50 years ago, yet trying to juggle wanting to reconnect with them with needing to focus on stopping Black Doom. But it's with Black Doom's provocation towards Shadow that the emotional side of the story starts to come into full swing, as at this point, the Doom Power's corruption is at its worst, causing Shadow to be consumed by nothing but pure rage. Until, like always, Maria steps in and reminds him of who he is.
Do you know why I named you Shadow? Because without light, there's only darkness. But a shadow will show you where to find the light.
I think this explanation behind Shadow's name is the perfect metaphor for his true character. How deep down, he is caring and selfless behind his tough exterior and introverted nature. As not only can a shadow not exist without light, but how one may look imposing at first, but if you keep looking, you find the light. It gives Shadow's name a much greater meaning that acts as a constant reminder to himself on who he really is. Whenever he says his name, he is literally stating who he is as a person, or Hedgehog. And we also learn in this moment that it was Maria who gave Shadow his name. And I think this too is a perfect way of symbolizing how important Maria's influence was on Shadow in just that one action. It's likely Maria immediately saw all the good in Shadow and all the potential for good he can do, which acted as her basis for the name. In naming Shadow, she helped define who he is straight from the get-go, meaning his name also acts as a reminder for all the belief Maria had in him. And it was dwelling on this moment that led me to realize that another core theme of this story is the idea of nature versus nurture. The conflict of, does Shadow succumb to the fate defined by his blood and become the destroyer that Black Doom wishes him to be? Or does he stay true to what Maria and Gerald taught him to be? A protector. It gave the story an even deeper meaning when I looked at it through that lens. One that I think accomplishes that theme much better than the game that kind of based itself entirely around that idea. And as an avid believer of the idea that the concept of real family shouldn't be defined by blood relation, I appreciated seeing this story highlight that, with the pure-hearted nurture side ultimately winning out, as thanks to Maria's words, Shadow was able to snap out of the corruption's influence. And from then on, even as he unlocks Doomwing and Black Doom grows stronger, he's able to fend off any more corruption by himself by holding on to everything Maria taught him, including how it's not what he is, but what he does that defines him, as well as holding on to her wish.
Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
I know that's not anything new for Shadow, but it felt so good to hear him say that after having it also ignored in the 2010s. And him giving the biggest smile he's ever given is the icing on the cake of showing his emotions and care. Then, even as Black Doom continues his attempts to worm his way into Shadow's head and force him to succumb to the corruption during the final boss fight, Shadow continues to keep hold of Maria's words and stays true to himself throughout, culminating in the coolest climax to his battle with his origins in this nature versus nurture conflict.
Cannot deny what you are. We are one and the same. Shadow Hedgehog. This is the destiny I choose.
Denying Black Doom's manipulations and carving his own path in a way that mirrors his characterization in 06, Shadow brings an end to all this and finishes off Black Doom. And in doing so, erases the Doom powers, which bummed me out a bit from a gameplay standpoint cause they were cool powers, but works well from a story standpoint, since it severs Shadow's connections to Black Doom and the rest of the Black Arms, the side of himself he's always hated, allowing him to finally break free from it. But with Black Doom's defeat, also means that Maria and Gerald start to fade away to return to their own time, leading to such a heartfelt conclusion for Shadow's character arc in this game. He toyed with the idea of changing the past to save them, and Dark Beginnings even ended with Shadow pondering what his life could have been like if Maria hadn't died. So now, he desperately tries to stop them disappearing because he doesn't want to lose them again, even if it means preventing the Sonics from being able to stop the Time Eater. But Maria, once again, gets through to him to convince him, alongside dialogue with Gerald about how changing the past would undo all the good Shadow's done and fundamentally change who he is, likely playing into that, leading Shadow to reluctantly do the hardest thing and let them go. This is something that Edgelord Shadow would not do. That Shadow would be selfish by not caring about the wider situation at hand or Maria's wishes and stop them from disappearing. But here, he lets them go. Cause deep down, he knows it's the right thing to do, and cause it's what Maria wants for him too, as much as it kills him to do so. The fact that this is the second time in the whole series we ever see Shadow cry, not only further conveys the extent of how losing Maria affected him when contrasting his usual headstrong demeanor, but also goes to show he does have feelings, and isn't this one-note jerkish edgelord. He sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of helping everyone else. That proves just how selfless Shadow truly is when he's done right. He just needed the push to make that difficult sacrifice. That coming in the form of Maria's final words to him.
I know I'll see you again. And if fate draws us apart, I will always be in your heart.
I was never a fan of Shadow quote-unquote putting the past behind him at the end of Shadow the Hedgehog, cause while I like the idea of Shadow growing to no longer let the past haunt him, and instead look to the future, I didn't like how that seemed to involve him just forgetting about Maria. It came off as heartless to me, and it left me wondering, what the fuck is the driving force of his character now? And not only does this game address that by recontextualizing it as a desperate attempt at a coping mechanism, this takes that same idea and executes it so much better in my opinion. Shadow's now able to move on after overcoming his past, but will always hold on to Maria's memory in his heart. Instead of trying to ignore it because of the painful memories involved, he's now keeping hold of all the good Maria did for him and everything she wished for, with that acting as a source of comfort for whenever he needs to get back on his feet. Staying committed to fulfilling his promise to her as his driving force, but still leaving it open for her wish to become his own too as he now looks ahead and focuses on the future. Especially now that he's gotten some form of closure by being able to say goodbye to her. So as I finished Shadow Generations, one thought went through my mind. Welcome back, Shadow the Hedgehog. I don't think I could have asked for much else when it comes to Shadow's characterization in this game. And when it comes to the most important stuff, I got exactly what I wanted. Not only was this an incredible return to form for him, feeling reminiscent of how he was in the games written by Shiro Miyakawa, but they also built upon what had already been long established to make it even better, and even improved upon the few areas I wasn't a fan of from the 2000s. Like, I always thought that the whole Shadow being part alien thing was really stupid, but after seeing what they did with it with the Doom powers, and especially the writing, I'm actually cool with it now. I like it! It feels so weird seeing the game that brought Shadow's true character back take so much influence from Shadow the Hedgehog, when that was the game where Edgelord Shadow first reared his ugly head. It encapsulates this new approach they've taken starting with Frontiers that I really like of looking at the games that were flawed to say the least, and bringing back their better aspects or reworking other aspects to improve them, rather than acting like they don't exist. And I think this has definitely been the best showcase of that thus far. The only thing I could have asked for is having Shadow interact more with the rest of the characters in his white space. I would have liked to have seen Shadow properly conversing with Omega to fully showcase the Team Dark dynamic. And even with Orbot and Cubot and Big randomly being here, it could have been fun to see Shadow's personality bounce off their goofier ones. But that's not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things. When it comes to everything that matters the most, it was exceptionally done. Never has the lyrics to All Hail Shadow fit so perfectly than listening to them after finishing this game. Which must be why they used it as a leitmotif throughout, including the awesome remix when against Neo Devil Doom. This game, as well as this whole Year of Shadow campaign for that matter, has, for the first time in my life, made me not feel any embarrassment when I say that Shadow is my favorite Sonic character. I dare people to try and call Shadow an edgelord after this. And hopefully, this means we can say sayonara to Edgelord Shadow, and forever stick to the true Shadow from now on. In which case, Sega! Make a full-fledged Shadow game with this kind of gameplay and writing, and my life is yours! All of this leaves me even more eager for the series and the rest of the cast as I too now look towards the future.